first thing I noticed were the lights in the hallway. They wouldn't flicker, not in the typical sense of a faulty bulb or a loose wire. Instead, they would dim and brighten in a slow, deliberate pulse, almost like breathing. It would last for maybe a minute, then stop. I'm a network engineer by trade, and my new house was my masterpiece. A fully integrated smart home where every circuit, every appliance, was wired into a central system I built myself. My initial thought was a power fluctuation or a software bug in one of the custom scripts I'd written to manage the lighting ambiances. I spent hours combing through lines of code, checking the electrical panel, but found nothing. The anomaly was untraceable, leaving no errors in the logs. It only ever happened when I was alone, and it felt strangely responsive, ceasing the moment I tried to record it. I don't usually share this kind of thing with many people. It sounds like the rambling of someone who's spent too much time alone, staring at screens. But those who enjoy hearing stories like this understand how some experiences just keep haunting your thoughts, demanding to be pieced together. If you're into this too, make sure to subscribe. It really helps me keep sharing stories like this here. Initially, I started a private digital log, thinking it would help me troubleshoot. I documented every little hiccup, the time, the duration, the specific device. I was convinced it was a complex network issue, a ghost in the machine that I, its creator, was uniquely qualified to exercise. That log, which started as a series of technical notes, slowly began to feel more like the diary of a man under silent observation. The breathing lights were just the beginning. A few days later, the coffee machine would turn on at exactly 3:17 a.m., brewing a full pot that I would find cold in the morning. The smart thermostat, programmed to maintain a constant 22 degrees Celsius, would suddenly plummet to a chilling 15 degrees for exactly 10 minutes before resetting itself. Each event was isolated and, on its own, easily dismissible as a trivial glitch. But they never happened randomly. There was a precision to the timing, a consistency to the actions that felt less like a system error and more like a deliberate, calculated pattern. My home, my fortress of solitude and control, was starting to feel like an elaborate cage. And something was testing the bars, seeing how I would react to its subtle provocations. I built this house to be my retreat from the world. After a decade working cybersecurity in the city, surrounded by the constant chaotic hum of people and networks under perpetual attack, I wanted absolute control. My name is Alex, and my entire life has been about finding logical solutions to complex problems. If a system had a flaw, I could find it, patch it, and reinforce it. This house was the ultimate expression of that philosophy, a sealed environment where every variable was accounted for and managed by me. My routine was rigid and comforting. I'd wake up, check the system diagnostics from my bedside tablet, work from my home office overlooking the woods, and spend my evenings fine-tuning the very automations that were now betraying me. My greatest vulnerability wasn't a weakness in my firewall, but my own stubborn refusal to consider any possibility that couldn't be explained by code. The house itself is less a home and more a high-tech shell. The floors are polished grey concrete, cold underfoot even with the radiant heating. The walls are mostly glass, offering panoramic views of a perpetually damp and brooding forest. An industrial-grade air filtration system fills the space with a faint, sterile smell, like the inside of a new server, and the silence is punctuated only by the soft, near-subsonic hum of the central server rack in the basement. Outside, it seems to rain constantly, a miserable grey drizzle that streaks down the enormous windows and blurs the world into a wash of muted greens and browns. The aesthetic is minimalist and clean, designed to soothe a mind overloaded with clutter. But lately, its stark emptiness had begun to feel less calming and more like a sterile observation room. My isolation is total, and it was a deliberate choice. The property is one of the first in a new, half-finished development that stalled out, leaving me as the sole resident on a street that fades into a gravel track at the edge of the woods. My nearest neighbor is over a mile away, and the dense tree line creates a natural barrier, muffling all sound from the outside world. I wanted silence, a place where the only noises were the ones I authorized. The gentle chime of a completed task, the whir of the HVAC, the click of a magnetic lock. Now, that carefully curated silence has become a canvas for these new, unnerving sounds. The glitches, the phantom brewing of coffee, the sudden drops in temperature. They are no longer just anomalies in the data. In the oppressive quiet of my self-imposed exile, they are becoming a voice. The turning point came on a Tuesday night. The rain was heavier than usual, hammering against the glass with a relentless, hypnotic rhythm. I'd stepped outside onto the covered porch to bring in a package that had been delivered, leaving the door open. As I turned back, it slid shut with a definitive, heavy click. My phone, which I'd left on the kitchen counter, was inside. Annoying, but not a crisis. My system was programmed to recognize my smartwatch and unlock the door on proximity. I raised my wrist, but nothing happened. I tried the manual voice command. "Access denied." A flat, synthesized voice replied from the external speaker. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at my skin. I was locked out of my own unbreachable home, standing in the cold, damp air, suddenly feeling incredibly small and exposed as the automated floodlights seemed to watch me with cold indifference. After fumbling for the emergency physical key hidden under a loose stone, a primitive backup I never thought I'd need, I finally got inside, drenched and furious. I stormed directly to my office, ready to tear apart the codebase for the door controller. I was certain I'd find a critical error, a line of faulty logic that triggered the lockdown. But when I pulled up the security logs, my blood ran cold. There was no error. The log showed a clear, authorized command: secure all access points, override. It was initiated locally from the hardwired terminal of my desktop computer. The timestamp corresponded to the exact moment I was standing on the porch. I was looking at a ghost command, an action performed by an invisible user sitting in my own chair while I was helplessly locked outside. The problem wasn't a flaw in the system. The system had executed a perfectly valid order. My world shifted in that instant. The strange occurrences were no longer passive glitches. They were active intrusions. This wasn't a bug. It was a breach. I spent the next 12 hours in a frantic, paranoid lockdown of my own making. I physically disconnected the main fiber optic cable from the street, severing my home from the outside world. I changed every password, every encryption key, running deep-level diagnostics on every server and device connected to the network. I was hunting for a remote hacker, some phantom from across the globe who had found a zero-day exploit in my design. I told myself that was the only possibility. It had to be, because the other option, that the command was executed by someone physically present, sitting right there in my office, that was a thought my logical mind refused to entertain. Not yet. For a full day after disconnecting the house from the outside world, there was silence. A deep, profound quiet that was more comforting than it had ever been. I felt like I had won, that I had successfully isolated the threat and starved it of its connection. I sat in my office monitoring the internal network logs, which remained clean and blessedly stable. I finally allowed myself to breathe. Then, in the middle of the afternoon, the sound system in the living room came to life. It began playing a specific, obscure piece of minimalist classical music that I only ever listened to when I was trying to focus. I kept the files on a local media server, a drive not connected to anything but the internal network. The music wasn't loud or distorted. It was played at a perfect, calm volume, which was somehow more terrifying than any loud noise. It was a message: I'm still here. Cutting the cord did nothing. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else has ever been through something like this slow, creeping loss of sanity in a place that's supposed to be safe. That's why I keep sharing these stories here. If you enjoy these strange accounts too, subscribe. It gives me strength to keep bringing more. The next day, desperate for some human contact, I called my sister using my cell phone's data plan. I walked through the house as I talked, my voice low, telling her I felt like I was being watched, that I was on the verge of a breakdown. I specifically remember saying, "It's in the walls, I swear." Not 5 minutes after I hung up, the small smart speaker on the kitchen counter crackled to life. A distorted, synthesized voice, a grotesque parody of my own, whispered the exact words. "It's in the walls." The line between paranoia and reality was gone. I was being actively monitored. The house wasn't just compromised, it was bugged. The true breaking point, however, came that night. I was in my bedroom getting ready for a sleep I knew wouldn't come when the smart display on my nightstand flickered on. It wasn't showing the time or the weather. It was a live video feed of me. I stared, frozen, at my own image, my face pale in the low light. The camera's perspective was wrong. It was high up, looking down at me from the corner where the ceiling met the wall, a spot that was, to my naked eye, completely bare. I saw the confusion on my digital face morph into pure terror before the screen went black. There were cameras in my house, hidden cameras I had not installed, watching me from the shadows. From that moment on, my behavior changed. The logical engineer was gone, replaced by a cornered animal. I took rolls of black electrical tape and covered the lens of every camera I had installed myself, on my laptop, my phone, the security panels. But it felt like a hollow gesture. I knew the real eyes were unseen. I stopped speaking aloud, afraid of what words would be repeated back to me. I moved through my own home in complete silence, my feet soft on the cold concrete, my eyes constantly scanning the corners, the vents, the tiny, dark spaces where a lens could be hidden. The minimalist design of my home, once a source of pride, now felt like a curse. There were no curtains to draw, no cluttered rooms to get lost in. It was an open stage, and I was the unwilling star of a one-man show for an audience of one. My sanity was a frayed thread, but it was a thread I could follow. The hidden camera feed, as horrifying as it was, gave me my first real clue: the angle. It was physically impossible without the camera being mounted inside the wall cavity or the ceiling crawl space. The intruder wasn't just on my network. They had physically altered my home. My objective shifted from defense to offense. I was no longer a victim hiding from a digital ghost. I was a hunter, and I was going to find the source. I grabbed the original architectural blueprints of the house, a flashlight, and a network cable toner. The hunt began in the cold, humming heart of my home, the basement server room. My own paranoia was now my sharpest tool, and I was going to use it to dissect my house piece by piece until I found the cancer growing within it. Down in the concrete basement, the air was cold and smelled of ozone from the humming electronics. The only sounds were the whirring of server fans and my own ragged breathing. I started with the central network switch, the nexus point for every piece of data in the house. Each cable was labeled, each port assigned in my meticulous documentation. I began tracing them one by one, a methodical, painstaking process. I cross-referenced each physical cable with the digital map on my tablet. Living room, kitchen, bedroom, security panel. Each one was accounted for. I felt a flicker of hope that I might have been wrong, that my mind was finally cracking under the strain. But I also felt a deep gut-level certainty that I was getting closer to something real and dangerous. The truth was here, hidden in the copper veins of my house. Then I saw it. Tucked behind a thick bundle of power lines, almost perfectly camouflaged, was a single black Ethernet cable. It wasn't on my blueprints. It wasn't in my port mapping records. It was a rogue element, an impossibility in my perfectly ordered system. The connection was professional, clean, using the same brand of connectors I did, as if to mock my own craftsmanship. My fingers trembled as I touched it. It was warm. Data was flowing through it, a silent stream of information bleeding from my network. I plugged the toner into the switch port it was connected to, and the device immediately screamed with a high-pitched tone, confirming a massive, constant data draw. I unplugged it, and the tone stopped. I had found the artery. Now I just had to follow it to the heart. The black cable snaked away from my rack, joining a conduit that ran along the ceiling before plunging into the thick concrete of the northern foundation wall. This was a section of the house I'd never given a second thought. On the plans, it was marked as an inaccessible utility crawl space, sealed off when the house was built. I followed the wall into a dark, unfinished corner of the basement used for storage. Dust hung thick in the air. I ran my hands along the cold concrete, then the section of drywall that finished the space. My fingers brushed against a seam I'd never noticed. The paint texture was subtly different, the surface a fraction of an inch less coarse than the surrounding wall. I pushed against it, and there was a slight give, a hollow sound that echoed in the oppressive silence. A surge of adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded my body. This was it. I ran back to my workshop and grabbed a pry bar and a heavy-duty flashlight. The sound of the metal bar crunching through the drywall was shockingly loud, a violent act of desecration against my own home. I ripped away a large section of plasterboard and the insulation behind it, revealing not pipes and foundation, but a dark, man-made opening. A wave of foul air washed over me. The smell of stale breath, unwashed clothes, body odor, and the unmistakable hot plastic stench of overheating electronics. It was the smell of occupancy, the smell of life, hidden away like a disease in the bones of my house. My stomach churned, and I had to fight the urge to be sick. With my heart hammering against my ribs, I shined the powerful beam of the flashlight into the void. The space was no more than 4 feet high, a narrow tunnel burrowed alongside the foundation. The walls were lined with dirty, grey acoustic foam, a crude attempt at soundproofing. In the center of the small space, I saw a filthy mattress stained with sweat, a small pile of empty protein bar wrappers, and plastic water bottles. In the corner was a chemical toilet bucket, emanating a sickeningly sweet stench. This wasn't a crawl space. It was a nest, a squalid, secret burrow where a human being had been living, breathing, and sleeping just feet away from where I went about my daily life, completely oblivious to their presence. My light beam trembled as it moved past the horrifying domestic scene and landed on the back wall of the cavity. There, bolted directly to the concrete, was a small, custom-built server rack. The rogue black cable I had found was plugged directly into it, and from the rack, a dozen smaller wires spider-webbed out, grafted parasitically onto my home's main electrical and data lines. This was the command center. On a makeshift shelf next to the rack sat a small, high-resolution monitor. It was displaying a grid of 16 silent, black-and-white video feeds. My kitchen, my office, my living room, my bedroom, from that impossible angle. My entire life, laid out in a cold, voyeuristic mosaic. He had built his own parallel nervous system right on top of mine. I stood there, paralyzed by the sheer horror and violation of the discovery. I had found the source. I had won. But as my eyes adjusted to the monitor's glow, I saw that one of the 16 squares was not black and white. It was in full, vivid color. It was a live feed from a camera I hadn't known existed, pointed directly at the hole I had just ripped in my own wall. On the screen, I saw myself, a wide-eyed, terrified figure, illuminated by the beam of my own flashlight. The watcher wasn't here, but he was watching. As I stared at my own horrified image, a small red LED on the monitor began to blink, an alert, a notification. He knew that I had found his secret world. The game had just changed. The blinking red light on that monitor broke the spell of my paralysis. It was an alarm, a signal that I had tripped a wire in the intruder's web. In that instant, I knew with absolute certainty that this person, wherever they were, was now looking directly at me through their system. The hunter had become the hunted. I didn't scream. I didn't even breathe. I scrambled backward, crab walking away from the hole in the wall, my flashlight dropping and rolling across the concrete floor, its beams spinning wildly. I didn't stop to think. I fled. Up the basement stairs, through the sterile rooms of the house that now felt utterly alien. I grabbed my car keys from the bowl by the door and burst out into the night, leaving the door gaping open. I drove for an hour, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, with no destination in mind, just a primal need to put as much distance as possible between myself and that house. From a brightly lit gas station miles away, I called the police. Trying to explain the situation to the dispatcher made me sound like a man having a complete psychotic break. A man in my walls. A hidden server. Secret cameras. To their credit, they sent a patrol car. The officers found everything exactly as I described it. The hole in the basement, the crude living quarters, the rack of electronic equipment, the monitor still displaying its grid of my empty rooms. The nest was real, but the occupant had evaporated. A thorough forensic investigation was conducted, but they found nothing. No fingerprints, no DNA, no stray hairs. The equipment was all custom-built or scrubbed of any identifying marks. It was as if a phantom had been living there and had simply dissipated into the air the moment it was seen. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what happened or who that person was. I never went back to the house. My lawyer handled the sale at a staggering loss. But as long as these stories keep haunting me, I'll keep sharing them here. If you want to hear more, subscribe. It really helps keep this space alive. I live in a small pre-war apartment in the city now. There are no smart devices, no integrated systems, but the damage is done. Every time a floorboard creaks in the apartment above, I freeze. Every reflection I catch in a dark window at night makes my heart leap into my throat. The intruder didn't just break into my house, they broke into my mind. They proved that no wall is thick enough, no system secure enough to keep true monstrosity out. I'm left with the horrifying knowledge that my life was, for months, someone else's television show, and I have no idea when the next season might begin.